Welcome back to Real Talk with Susan Stone and Kristina Supler. We are full-time moms and attorneys bringing our student defense legal practice to life with real, candid conversations.
Around a year ago, I started hearing high school and college kids tell me that they don't want kids. When the first college student told me this, I thought that the sentiment was particular to that student. However, since that time, I've been hearing this from a lot of different kids. Kristina, what the heck is growing up? I mean, I remember when I was a little girl fantasizing, what am I going to name my babies when I have them? And now nobody wants babies.
I don't know. It's a really interesting question, Susan, and I'm really excited to explore it today. I understand wanting to put off having children to develop a career, to launch yourself professionally, but I'm still sort of struggling with hearing from young adults who just say, I don't want to have a family at all.
This seems to become more prevalent since COVID, and I'm wondering if it's just a coincidence. I'm hoping our guest today is going to help us explore why students don't want children. Is it new, or has the thought been around for a long time and we're just noticing it? It might be new to us.
We're pleased to be joined today by Dr. Whelan, a clinical professor in the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's the author of Why Smart Men Marry Smart Women and Marry Smart, The Intelligent Woman's Guide to True Love. She also wrote another book called The Big Picture, A Guide to Finding Your Purpose in Life. And it's really a small steps program to help young adults figure out what matters and how to make it happen. And I just have to mention, there's one other piece in Dr. Whelan's bio that I love, and that is that at the age of 8, she hosted a nationally syndicated radio show called No Kidding, a health talk show for kids by kids.
Today would be a podcast. Not a radio show.
Welcome, Dr. Whelan. We're happy to have you with us.
Oh, and I love that you wrote about purpose in life. I'm going to be 57, and I keep telling everybody that after my last goes to college, I want to find my purpose in life. But let's just kick this off. Am I right? Students don't want to start a family. They don't dream about being mommy or daddy.
So the birth rate has been declining for quite a while now. And in a sense, we're seeing some positive trends. We are seeing fewer people getting pregnant accidentally and fewer unwanted pregnancies. We are seeing folks waiting longer to have kids, perhaps until they are stably partnered and financially secure. So on the one hand, we can see some positive trends there. On the other hand, what we are seeing is that the United States is below replacement rate at this point, which means that there are more people growing old and passing away than we are replacing with new babies born here. Now, certainly you can have folks who come to the United States by other means like immigration. But when we look at changes around the decision to have or not to have a child, I think it's kind of important to sort of take a step back in history a little bit, because part of my own history is the beginnings of this discussion. So even as late as the 1960s, it was assumed that a man and a woman would get married and the woman would have children. And there was this assumption that you didn't really have a choice as a woman. You definitely were going to have kids. My mother was an epidemiologist, and she looked at all sorts of demographic factors, including the choice to have children or not. And when she and my father were considering what to do, they actually went to all these child-free meetings. And so for the first couple of years of their marriage, they decided they were not going to have kids. And that this was really a radical idea in the mid-70s, that a couple could get married and not have kids. But then along the way, my mom thought, maybe I should talk to other people who are making this decision. And she wrote a book called A Baby Maybe, A Guide to Making the Most Fateful Decision of Your Life. And she interviewed all these women who were saying, gosh, should I have a child or should I not have a child? Which was a new topic in the 1970s. By the end of the book, though, she made a decision. And here you are. And here I am. So I'm the baby maybe. But
do you have siblings?
I don't. I am the one and only. No, they obviously broke the mold when they made me. But right,
Yeah.
but the maybe thing is wild. So this question was coming up even in the 70s.
That's great. And I didn't realize that. I wanted to comment that I read an article, and I believe it was in the Times, don't quote me, that China is actually rethinking
Yes.
its policy because for so long it was a one-child rule, and now the country is below replacement rate. Who would have thought?
Yeah.
So what's the cause or the reason why young adults now are reevaluating life goals?
Is it worse? And has something changed since the 70s?
Yeah. So first of all, in the 70s, the blame was placed on overachieving women who were not doing their responsible thing and staying home and having babies. And there was a lot of cultural commentary about these women who were getting too much education and wanted to work and weren't like doing their part.
How dare they?
It became a sort of politically polarized issue and what the role of woman was. Then as that began to fade, and especially as a nation, as we became less religiously driven
Right.
and more individually driven in our career choices, we then saw that, in fact, those women who were highly educated and successful in their careers, we saw the tide turning. And it was those women who were, in fact, more likely to get married, more likely to stay in stable relationships, and more likely to have children. They were just doing so at a later age. So in terms of lifetime childbearing, we were seeing women having children in their 30s and into their early 40s as a much more common occurrence rather than in their early 20s. And so that's what we began to see in the 90s and the early 2000s. But unfortunately, for those who are hoping for more of the replacement rate in the United States, as that age of first birth kept getting pushed back and further back, yes, there were advances in terms of in vitro fertilization and other treatments to help women have children past normal childbearing age. But we also saw an increasing number of people saying, that ship has sailed. I have chosen to do different things in my life.
So what's going on now? Why are younger kids, high school kids saying, I don't want to do this? What's making them think that way?
A couple things. First, they watch their parents and how their parents are struggling. At one point, one of my kids
Oh
said
my
to me,
gosh.
Mommy,
That makes sense.
Mommy, it doesn't look like it's very much fun to be a mommy. You have to work. You have to do all this stuff at home. You never rest or get a break. This doesn't look like this is that much fun. And the mother in me just cringes and says, oh no, now I have to, on top of everything else I have to do, now apparently I have to make mothering look more fun. Otherwise I'm going to raise a generation of kids who don't want to do this. So I think, first of all, kids are seeing the challenge of working motherhood. Second, we are really being raised in a very individualistic culture. And when it's all about me, and what makes me happy, parenting by its very nature is a sacrifice. Right? It is a giving of yourself. It is a generative thing. And that's not something our culture talks about.
Totally agree. It's the ultimate act of selflessness in many ways because your life becomes about others.
It's interesting because I am your statistic. I had my first child in 97 and my last child in the early 2000s. And I had 3, did my best to get them done with. But I will say age makes a difference. It's hard getting up the older you are in the middle of the night with that crying baby. And then you never sleep. Let's be real. You never sleep the same. I still am up at 3 a.m. thinking about my daughter who's 25. And so how do we present it in a way that's joyous? I think the joy comes later. Don't you think?
Yes, that is very true. And so in the academic world, we would say that really what you're talking about is eudaimonic happiness. That's what Aristotle called the idea of satisfaction from putting your all into something that is very meaningful and purposeful for you. And eudaimonic happiness is really wonderful. Hedonic happiness is happiness in the moment. And I think we really need both. So what these young adults who are saying, I don't want to have kids, what they're seeing is decades without any hedonic happiness in front of them. And so eudaimonic happiness out in the distance doesn't seem quite as appealing as giving up all of your hedonic happiness right now, if that's the way society frames parenting. And the reason in part, we frame it that way is because we have this idea that you have to be a superwoman. You have to do it all. So you have to have a big career, and you have to somehow be with your children all the time, and leaving women feeling like they're failing all the time. And interestingly enough, leaving the kids feeling like they are to blame for their parents' overwhelm and discontent. And so then we wonder why kids don't want to have kids themselves.
Well, you have me thinking about the idea of it all, in essence, it all starts at home. I mean, when Susan and I are representing students across the country, dealing with various forms of issues that are essentially crisis, so often the root of an issue, you can trace it back to various family dynamics. And I'm just wrestling with this idea of children seeing their mother, struggle to balance it all and achieve professional goals. And it is a struggle, but then also this idea, and perhaps that makes them not want to have kids, but then also you have to show, it's important to show your kids happiness and joy. And I think it's important to have kids see both of that, but it sounds like there's risk in having your kids see mom struggle because it's hard to have it all and do it all. And what are your thoughts on what the right balance is there?
Man, I would love to know what the right balance is, because I'm trying to figure it out on a day-to-day basis. There's that old adage that you have to fill your own bucket before you can give to others. And so what I decided for myself is that I would not be who I am unless I did paid work of some sort. At the same time, I also realized that I can't be who I am if I didn't spend a big chunk of my time with my family and mothering and engaged in all of the childcare activities. So what that meant is that I had to pull back in both and try to do a little bit in different, at different times. Now, it's not that I do 50-50 on a daily basis. There are some days where tomorrow I'm going to be gone all day giving a guest lecture at Emory Law School. I will be gone all day and I won't see the kids in the morning when they get up or at night when they go to sleep. That's not a balanced day in terms of mothering. That's a day dedicated to my career.
Sure.
But then there are plenty of other days where on Friday they're going to be off school. I'm going to be with them all day long. And so I think finding the balance that works for you is important, and also important for the next generation to see that there are choices that they can make to do things either differently than what I did or differently than some of the other cultural messages that they're getting. Optionality is really what everybody wants, and yet not having a clear path also stresses people out. So it's a double-edged sword.
What is also stressful is just cost of raising children.
Oh, so expensive.
And I'm not talking about the tennis lessons and the high-priced colleges. I'm talking basic copays for the pediatrician,
Food, medicine, all of it.
therapy, clothes. Some people have kids that I have a really good friend. Her son, she blinks and he needs new pants. And not everybody can afford that. So the stress of economics has got to impact that choice. And then I hear students say, there's only so much to go around and I want that money that I make for me. Is that selfish or realistic?
It's quite realistic. So these students are also going to be coming out with a whole lot of debt. So how do you think about adding another dependent person to your budget when you yourself are very much in the red? My grandmother used to say that every baby comes with its own loaf of bread. And that was such a sweet expression and so not true.
I was going to say, pondering that, I'm like, wait, what?
Yeah, no, even formula is expensive.
Exactly. Even formula.
Diapers.
Sure. And while there are ways to keep the costs down and to do sharing economy things, it's very difficult. The other thing that by the way, that is difficult is childcare. And because we have a generation of folks who are pursuing their careers, we also don't have a bunch of grandparents who are interested in giving free childcare to their grandchildren. And
They
so
can't.
that they can't, because they can't afford to do so.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I remember that when my daughter was in elementary school, she had a project called Notable Woman, and she picked Indra Nooyi, who was the CEO of Pepsi. And we went to visit her. She shared that her dream would be that eventually, when her children had children, she would give up this role of running a major conglomeration and help raise her kids, because that was her culture, that her parents helped her. Now, I was a single mother, and boy, I could have used that help.
Oh, yeah. You think about single parents and all the complicated dynamics that bear on child raising today. And just thinking to the comment about food and formula, and it popped into my head not that long ago, there was the formula shortage. Who would have predicted that? The stress of, oh my gosh, I literally don't know if I can give my child a bottle in 2 hours.
That's scary. But do you think the pandemic and that the fact that more people can work from home, will that encourage maybe some rethinking of this issue?
No. And in fact, I think it actually might make it worse. So what we're also seeing is young adults having first sexual intercourse at later ages. And while that is good from a disease and pregnancy, unplanned pregnancy perspective, one of the things that we're really seeing is that the reason why young adults are not being physically intimate with each other is because they're not physically together a lot. And
Wow.
So then you have a generation that's increasingly physically isolated. And the more that we physically isolate people, the less likely it is that you're going to create a family. As we delay marriage, as we delay these kinds of intimate partner bonds, then obviously we're going to be delaying having children and making babies the normal way, right? So I worry that the pandemic actually is going to make things worse rather than better. And by the way, for all the moms out there who tried to raise their young children during those early days of the lockdown, which is just 3 years ago, we remember what it was like to try to do our jobs and have a toddler or 2 or 3 running around. So no, work from home is not easier with kids.
I've read some media interviews you did where you were speaking about this issue and the fact that there was no pandemic baby boom. Eventually, hopefully, fingers crossed, when we all come back together at some point and we're not so in this idea of working from home, although I'm assuming we will come back together. Perhaps we won't. Do you expect, though, eventually to see birth rates climb again?
I worry about this a little bit because with my college students, they are really still socially awkward. They don't have the same social skills or even really the desire to hang out with other people that I would have expected young adults to have at this age. And if we see a shift more toward virtual worlds, more toward virtual interactions, then just basic physiology, if you're not there together, it's going to be really hard to make babies and raise them in co-environment.
I want to shift a little bit because I've written a lot about finding your purpose in life. And I come from the philosophical belief that we're all here to correct our character defects through finding meaning, and that we all have a unique gift. But I got to tell you, nothing holds a mirror to your face as to your character defects or your strengths than having children. And when you see that kid, both good and bad, my daughter, I love to cook, and I watched my youngest this weekend create a homemade focaccia. And she's, Mom, I just want to be a good cook like you are. You always make such beautiful dishes. You feel pride. Conversely, I have a spitfire temper. And when I see my kids lose their temper, I know exactly where that came from and who's to blame. But it gives me an opportunity to work on myself and say, ouch, I don't like that character trait. This is something that I need to work on to be a better person. And the more I model the mistakes I've made and how I correct them, I feel like I'm fulfilling my purpose through children. What are your thoughts on that?
That is very beautiful and a very evolved way of thinking about it. And it's not the way that everybody else often thinks about it. If the other way you could be thinking about it is when you see your children acting in ways that you don't like about yourself, a lot of people lash out at their kids and are particularly angry at their kids because they are embarrassed that is also their behavior. And so if you can do some really good work around it and grow from it, that would be ideal. But not everybody is there. The joke that I make with my kids is that I will know that I have been a good mother if they are in therapy for different problems than what I am in therapy for.
That is very funny.
That is very funny.
Let's be real. We're talking having kids is not a walk in the park. It can high highs and low lows. And teens in particular can really be particularly frustrating and challenging and also awesome. But are people, what does the research say? Are adults without kids happier?
Yeah. So this is the tricky bit, is that at the end of life, whether you have had a child or not doesn't really matter in terms of your happiness. It's not that adults without kids are happier. It's that, or that people with kids are less happy. It's that when I don't know any mother or father who looks at their children and says, I wish I had not had these children. We don't as humans tend to have that feeling. So we make a choice one way or the other, and we build a life around it. And it's one of life's, this was one of my mother's wonderful lines. She would say, it's just one of life's many options. And what she meant there was that we all have a lot of choices. Also, there is that underpinning of that, which is, and then those choices have consequences. So if you are the type of person that does not want to have children, and you know that about yourself, don't have children. Don't do it because somebody else wants you to, or you think you should. And if you are the type of person that wants to have children and that really craves that, then don't worry about whether you're going to be able to balance it all. Have the children, create the family, create the love, and you will. Generations of us have figured it out.
Live your life.
It's going to say,
live your life.
It's what we tell our kids. Peer pressure. Don't succumb to it. You do you, whatever it is.
Whatever it is. If you want a baby, have a baby. If you don't, you will find meaning in other ways. But we know from Harvard's happiness study, I love this study, the quality of relationships is what determines happiness.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not quantity. It is quality.
And you can have those quality relationships outside of your nuclear family. Those quality relationships very much can come from friends, from extended family. But often those quality relationships come in your intimate family, from children, from partners. And that, of course, is the line with, if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Or you are only as happy as your least happy child.
Yeah. I will say that I still remember that moment that when I had my first daughter. And Alex, if you're listening to this, it's about you. And I will say when they handed that baby to me, it really was like a Hollywood moment. I fell in love with her in a way that I have never experienced before. And yes, I fell in love with the siblings too.
And you never did. You only had that feeling once.
Only one. No, but you do when they hand you that baby. There is that euphoria that you get, that depth of love. It's just different from other love.
I challenge you on that I think that is, I don't know that all women feel that. I think a lot of women hold that baby and they're like, oh God, what now?
What have I done?
Yeah, that's a good point. Some people feel depressed or overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And you can also have all of those feelings all at once. And you can have the love and the overwhelm and the terror, and those feelings will last throughout the lifetime. We're all an experiment of one, right? There is no one size fits all approach to this, which is why I really like teaching young adults about the idea of purpose and meaning, because it's about asking questions of what are your core values? What are your strengths? Who do you want to positively impact? What are the fears and anxieties that come up for you in a day, when you are trying to tackle a big project or make a decision? And then how can you make purpose-based commitments one step at a time to do the things that matter to you? And when I break it down for young adults like that, it really helps, I think, because these are huge topics that might otherwise emotionally paralyze us. And breaking it down hopefully demystifies it and allows people to make a decision that's right for them.
In the introduction, we mentioned that you are a mother of 5. And so if I may ask you a personal question, tell our listeners what inspired you to have such a large family.
I have a Brady Bunch family. I have so we'll start with I have a 7, 9, and 11-year-old who are my biological kids. And then I am stepmom to twin 14-and-a-half-year-old boys. And of course, because we had to be a Brady Bunch family, we also added a dog, who is a girl. So now we have 3 girls and 3 boys, and we can do the whole squares. And we have a fabulous household manager who keeps me sane. So she's our Alice. And we have the full...
You really are the Brady Bunch family.
We really are.
Now that's
Brady
funny.
Bunch square thing going. And it's total chaos. I was an only child. I grew up in an apartment in Manhattan. I am now the mother of 5 and a dog with a minivan in the Midwest. And I often have those moments of, I have no idea how this happened, but yet I do, because I love the energy, the chaos, the joy and the laughter. And it is not at all what I expected. My life did not at all turn out how I expected. And yet it is so beautiful as a teaching tool for me in terms of letting go of my otherwise type A personality and control freakness and wanting everything to be just so. Because do you know what? With 5 kids and a dog, it can't be perfect.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
It depends how we define perfect. What is perfect for you might be just getting dinner on the table and having that really good conversation come up.
I agree. That's a good point. Perfect is obviously it can be different for everyone. And so...
Absolutely. Now, my 20-year-old self would have defined perfect in a much more organized and precise fashion. My 45-year-old self would want to give my 20-year-old self a hug and say, it's going to be a wild ride, honey, but you're going to come out the other end of it with a lot of self-growth. So really, to your point, that children are wonderful teachers and mirrors into yourself and where you need to grow. Now, thinking about this from the kids' perspective, you also want to make sure that you are supporting them in their own individual journeys so that they can be a mirror to themselves and make good choices about their own future.
Is it even worth having a conversation with young adults when they say they do or don't want kids? Because part of me thinks you just don't know until you're at that point in life. I remember in my early 20s, because I waited till after law school to think about it. I couldn't even really envision what that meant. And then all of a sudden, when you want that baby, it's like you see babies everywhere, pregnant women everywhere. And that's all you see. You know, when I hear a young adult say, I do or don't want children, is it something that you just let them articulate and go, mm-hmm? Because you and I know man plans, God laughs. And you just don't know until you know.
Yes. And it's worthwhile to ask those questions because they can get at deeper issues. So if somebody says, I definitely don't want to have children, then explore why. What is it? Do you want to build a particular kind of life for yourself? And if you do, let's take some steps toward building a life that is going to fulfill those needs and those values and use those gifts. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to have children along the way. If I could go back to myself with an infant the first time round, I would want to remind myself and all young mothers that you can strap the baby to you and go do just about whatever you want. And that's a really cool. So by the time I had my youngest, he was just on me and I was off and gone. And it was great because you have more confidence of how the child can also incorporate into the life that you want to have. But when you're young, you see it as an either or. And that kind of dichotomy scares people.
Well, that's funny that you you say that because I know with my first, there were times I was literally afraid to leave the house. Like I loved her so much, but I was like, okay, how am I going to go to the grocery store with the baby, get the food I need, get it all in the car? And it just felt incredibly overwhelming. And of course, obviously you figure it out. But, that idea of strap the baby on, you go wherever, do whatever is for first time mothers or just some mothers in general. They just can't get there and it needs a lot of support and encouragement to have that realization.
I do have to ask a value-based question. I agree, not everybody's meant to be a parent. And that's a perfectly wonderful choice for someone who has a vision of their life being different. Here's where I'm struggling and maybe even being judgy. I'm going to get a little judgy here.
First time.
I struggle with this. So maybe, Christine, you're going to give me a little soul correction. I don't have a problem with someone saying to me, I don't want children because I want to pursue my passion for art, or I don't like children. Where it bites me a little bit is when I hear it out of complete selfishness. Like, I want all the money for me. Me, 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 me. It's not like I want to volunteer or I want to go into service or I want to go into government or I want to run for political office or I want to pursue a passion. But are we devolving as a society where it's just the hedonistic value? And should that be corrected when you hear it out of a teenager's mouth? Do you as a parent have to say, it's not always all about you?
Yes.
And why is that desirable?
Yes. And the answer doesn't have to then be kids. But I teach lots about the importance of pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior means doing something that benefits someone else. And the research is absolutely clear that when we use our limited resources of time, of energy, of money in a way that is pro-social, that involves others and helps others, we as individuals are much happier. And so to the person who says, no, I don't want to have kids, I want to spend all that money on me, that kind of self-focus is not a recipe for happiness. However, when this is a person who potentially was raised not having the things that they wanted because they could see how much their parents struggled to put food on the table to make sure that their kids could get stuff, they might not want to repeat that. And at this stage of their lives. So then maybe focusing on the idea of, well, then great, you're going to have this extra money. What pro-social things are you going to do with it so that you can use your gifts in keeping with your values to make a positive impact on the lives of others? That's purposeful and doesn't have to involve kids.
For what it's worth, Susan, I don't think that was a judgy question/comment. I think it was a very good one.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really love the way you frame that because it's okay to say, I don't like children. I don't want that path. But how are you going to give back? What is going to be your contribution?
And the one other thing that I will say, though, is that there are periods in your life that evolutionarily and by their very nature and structure are going to be more selfish than others. And that's okay. So young adulthood is a fairly solipsistic, selfish time of life. It should be that way because you are investing in yourself. You're in your own education, in your future career. You're making decisions. You've got to focus inward on you during that period. That's understandable. As we get older, we tend to be more generative. We tend to want to help other people more. We tend to want to share our wisdom. And there is a sort of an arc, and various religions and cultures have seen this, that, there's a time in life where you are focused on yourself, a time in life when you're focused on others, and then potentially a time in life when you're focused on thinking and legacy and then what comes next. If you have a selfish teenager, if you have a selfish kid in their early 20s, yes, talking about pro-social behavior is important. You can also put in that kind of pro-social behavior will make you as an individual happier, if that's the language that they best understand.
Last question, Dr. Whelan. What advice should parents give to their own children to help them find their purpose as they look to the future?
She's asking for a friend.
For a friend.
Asking for a friend. That's right. Not my own two children.
No.
And I do this with my own kids too. So I have this purpose statement exercise. It's free. It's on my website on KristineWhelan.com. You can download it. But what I have my kids talk about with me and then for themselves is those questions of, what do I value? What are the strengths I want to use? And who do I want to help? And then what are the things I'm anxious about? And what are the goals that I can set? And these are 5 questions that are in this Mad Libs purpose statement. I do it myself. And then I share mine with my kids. The teenagers absolutely roll their eyes. I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. They think this is ridiculous. However, if I model purposeful behavior and I talk about how even by making a baked potato bar for the family, I am living on purpose, and why that is using my values, why that's using my gifts in keeping with my values and how I'm positively impacting them. Honestly, you got to model the behavior that you're seeking. And so we talk a lot about this as a family, and it might be worth having a conversation about your family purpose statement for the week. If you do a Sunday meeting or a summer purpose statement. And any way that you can get this idea of values, strengths, and positive impact while acknowledging fears and anxieties, because that's a really important, otherwise this gets sort of sugar-coated too much. Acknowledging those fears and anxieties and then saying, you know what, I'm going to do these things and I'm going to feel good about myself when I do these. Have that conversation, see how it goes.
I'm just going to make a wish. I don't know. Is your mom still around?
She unfortunately passed away 9 years ago.
I am so sorry. Well, I won't get my wish because my wish would have been for Kristina and I to create a trip and sit with a bottle of wine with you and your mom. So since I can't get your mom, I'm grateful that we could talk about your mom. And hopefully one day I can have that wish and meet you in the flesh, because I would love to sit down with some rosé with you and continue this conversation offline.
I would love that too. And my eldest daughter, Eleanor, who's nearly 12, would love to join in as well, because while I had my first radio show at 8, she started her Health is Everything, No Kidding podcast when she was 8. And she now, like mother, like daughter, and mother, like daughter. She has lots of ideas on this topic as well.
Let us know if she would like to be on our podcast, because we've had students talk to us.
I love it.
Yes, I'll send you the link to her podcast. And
okay,
well, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a real treat speaking with you, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed it as well.
This was a fun one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Real Talk with Susan and Kristina. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our show so you never miss an episode. And leave us a review so other people can find the content we share here. You can follow us on Instagram. Just search our handle @StoneSupler. And for more resources, visit us online at studentdefense.kjk.com. Thank you so much for being a part of our Real Talk community. We'll see you next time.